The airport terminal hummed with activity as travelers hurried past, dragging suitcases and balancing coffee cups. The air carried the usual mix of excitement and exhaustion, the scent of fresh pastries blending with the crisp coolness of air conditioning. Among the crowd, two young boys sat quietly near the large windows overlooking the runway, their eyes wide with wonder as planes taxied in the distance. Marcus, the older of the two at 14, adjusted his backpack straps, while his younger brother, Jaden, barely 12, bounced his legs with excitement. This was their first time flying alone, and despite the nervous butterflies in their stomachs, they couldn't wait to see their uncle in Los Angeles. Their mother had gone over the instructions a dozen times. Keep your boarding passes safe. Follow the signs. If you need anything, ask a flight attendant. It had sounded simple enough. But as they sat there, waiting for their boarding group to be called, a strange feeling settled over them. Maybe it was the way people glanced at them, some with curiosity, others with something harder to define. They weren't sure why, but they felt watched. A few rows away, a flight attendant stood near the gate, her polished uniform pristine, her blonde hair pulled back into a perfect bun. Her name tag read Melissa Carter. She had worked for Sky Atlantic Airlines for over 5 years and took pride in her role. But there was something about the two boys that didn't sit right with her. They were alone. No parents, no chaperone in sight. Her brows furrowed slightly as she studied them from a distance. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the situation felt off. She glanced at the gate agent, then back at the boys. Finally, she strode toward them, her heels clicking against the tile floor with purpose. "Excuse me," she said, stopping in front of them with a tight-lipped smile. "Are you two traveling alone?" Marcus nodded quickly, sensing something in her tone that made him sit up straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Our mom booked our tickets. We're flying to LA to see our uncle." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have your boarding passes?" Jaden fumbled in his backpack before pulling them out, handing them over. She took the tickets, scanning them as if searching for something wrong. "And where are your parents?" "Our mom dropped us off," Marcus answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "She spoke to someone at the check-in counter. They said everything was fine." Melissa hummed under her breath, still looking at the tickets. Something about this situation didn't sit right with her. Two unaccompanied minors, no adult nearby. She had dealt with situations before where kids tried to board flights they weren't supposed to be on. Maybe it was just an instinct, but she felt like she needed to dig a little deeper. "I need to check something," she finally said, handing the tickets back but not moving away. Instead, she turned toward the counter and spoke to one of her co-workers in hushed tones. The boys exchanged a glance. Something wasn't right. Other passengers were boarding without any trouble, so why was she so focused on them? After a few minutes, Melissa returned, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you board this flight." Marcus blinked. "What? Why not?" "There's an issue with your tickets," she said, her tone crisp and final. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Jaden's stomach twisted. But our mom said." "I don't want to hear it," Melissa cut him off, already gesturing for security. "You need to come with me. Now." Passengers nearby started to glance over, murmuring among themselves. The boys could feel the weight of the stares, their faces heating with confusion and embarrassment. Marcus stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This isn't fair. We didn't do anything wrong." Melissa's gaze hardened. "I'm not going to argue. Step away from the gate." A security officer approached, looking between the boys and Melissa. "Is there a problem here?" "They're not cleared to fly," Melissa said sharply. "I need them escorted away from the gate area." Jaden's eyes welled up with frustration. "Please, just call our mom. She'll tell you everything's okay." But Melissa had already made up her mind. She didn't know that her decision would change everything. She didn't know that the owner of the airline, the man who signed her paychecks, the man who built Sky Atlantic Airlines from the ground up, was about to hear exactly what had happened. And when he did, the entire situation would turn upside down in ways Melissa never saw coming. Marcus's heart pounded as the security officer stepped closer. The people around them had stopped what they were doing, some whispering, others just staring. He could feel Jaden tensing beside him, his little brother's breathing getting shaky. This wasn't right. They had done everything correctly. Their mother had booked the tickets, checked them in, and given them all the instructions they needed. So why were they being treated like they didn't belong? Marcus swallowed hard and forced himself to speak calmly. "Sir, we really didn't do anything wrong. Our mom booked this flight for us. Please, just call her. She'll explain everything." The security officer hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Melissa. For a moment, it seemed like he wasn't sure what to do. Then Melissa straightened her posture, her expression tight with authority. "I already told them," she said sharply. "There's an issue with their tickets. We can't hold up the boarding process. Just escort them out of the gate area so we can move on." Jaden's lip trembled, but he pressed his mouth into a firm line, trying to be brave. He looked up at Marcus, waiting for his big brother to fix this, but Marcus didn't know how. The fear, the confusion, the unfairness of it all, it boiled inside him, but he knew getting angry wouldn't help. The security officer let out a slow breath. "All right, boys, come with me. Let's step aside and get this sorted." Marcus clenched his fists, but before he could protest, Jaden grabbed his sleeve and tugged lightly. "Marcus," he whispered, "let's just go. We can call Mom." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Jaden was scared, and no matter how unfair this was, getting kicked off a plane was bad enough. He didn't want security dragging them out in front of everyone. Taking a deep breath, he nodded and pulled his backpack over his shoulders. "Fine," he muttered. The security officer led them away from the gate, past rows of travelers pretending not to watch. Marcus could feel every glance burning into his back. His face felt hot with frustration, but he kept walking, Jaden close beside him. He glanced over his shoulder once, locking eyes with Melissa. She didn't look guilty or unsure. If anything, she looked satisfied. Once they were far enough from the gate, the security officer stopped. He crouched slightly to meet their eye level. His expression wasn't harsh like Melissa's. It was more tired than anything else. "All right," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Let's figure this out. Do you have a way to call your mother?" Marcus nodded quickly and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking slightly as he dialed, pressing the phone tightly to his ear. It rang twice before his mother's voice came through, worried and rushed. "Marcus? Are you guys okay? Did you board already?" His throat tightened. He didn't want to sound scared. "Mom," he said, forcing his voice to stay even. "They won't let us on the plane. They said there's a problem with our tickets, but we don't know what's wrong." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "What?" "Marcus, I checked everything before you left. There is no problem with your tickets." His mother's voice was growing louder, frustration mixing with concern. He could hear her moving, the sound of car keys jingling. "Put me on the phone with someone. A manager, a supervisor, I don't care. This isn't right." Marcus turned to the security officer. "She wants to talk to someone in charge." The officer exhaled, standing up. "All right, let's go to the customer service desk. They should be able to clear this up." As they walked, Marcus kept the phone close to his ear, listening to his mother's rapid breathing. "Mom," he said quietly. "I'm here, baby," she said, her voice softer now. "I need you to stay calm, okay? I know this is scary, but I'm going to fix it. I promise." Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her. They reached the service desk, where a woman in a navy blue blazer was typing on a computer. She barely glanced up as they approached. Next. The security officer gestured toward the boys. They were removed from their flight. Their mother is on the phone. She wants to speak with a supervisor. The woman finally looked up, eyes flicking between Marcus and Jaden before she held out her hand. Marcus hesitated, then passed her the phone. "Hello," she said briskly. The boys couldn't hear what their mother was saying, but whatever it was, it made the woman sit up straighter. Her expression shifted slightly, from indifferent to something closer to nervous. I understand, ma'am," she said. "Let me check the system." She typed rapidly, her fingers tapping against the keys in a steady rhythm. Then she froze. Her brows pulled together. She scrolled, then typed again. A muscle in her jaw twitched. Jaden leaned into Marcus. "What's happening?" he whispered. Marcus shook his head. He wasn't sure, but something had changed. The woman cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I see that the tickets are perfectly valid. There was no issue with the booking." A long pause. Then, yes, I understand. I'll get the boys back on the flight immediately." She handed the phone back to Marcus. His mother's voice came through, sharp and clear. "Marcus, they're fixing it. Stay put." Relief flooded his chest, but before he could say anything, another voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" "Melissa." She had appeared beside the desk, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The service agent's face paled slightly. It seems there was a mistake. Their tickets are fine. I'm reinstating their boarding passes." Melissa's expression hardened. "That's impossible. I was told there was a problem with their booking." The woman shook her head quickly. "No, there wasn't. I don't know where that information came from." Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes flicked to the boys, then back to the agent. She opened her mouth like she was about to argue, but before she could, the service agent turned back to Marcus and Jaden. "Boys, I'm so sorry for this inconvenience. You're cleared to board. I'll personally escort you to your seats." Jaden let out a tiny breath of relief. Marcus only nodded, but his jaw was still tight. This wasn't just a mistake. He could feel it in his bones. Melissa didn't want them on that flight. As the agent printed fresh boarding passes, Melissa took a step closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't necessary," she said, her tone edged with frustration. "I was just following policy." The woman glanced up at her, something wary in her gaze. "I don't think you were." Melissa stiffened. Marcus didn't say anything, but as he took the new boarding passes, he made sure to look her straight in the eyes. This wasn't over. And from the way her expression flickered, he could tell she knew it too. As they walked back toward the gate, the whispers had grown louder. Passengers had seen what happened. Some gave the boys sympathetic looks. Others glanced at Melissa, their faces unreadable. Melissa turned, feeling the weight of those stares. For the first time, a small flicker of doubt crept into her chest, and then her phone buzzed. A message. From her father. "We need to talk. Now." Melissa's fingers tightened around her phone as she read the message again. "We need to talk. Now." A sudden unease settled in her chest. Her father never sent messages like that. He was always composed, always careful with his words. If he wanted to talk, it meant something serious had happened. Her gaze flickered back to the two boys walking toward the gate with the service agent. Passengers were still murmuring, stealing glances in her direction. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, subtle but undeniable. Something she had done had drawn attention, and not in the way she had expected. She stepped away from the gate, gripping her phone tightly as she dialed her father's number. It barely rang once before his voice came through, sharp and unreadable. "Melissa." She swallowed. "Dad, What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it that made her stomach twist. "I don't understand," she said carefully, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I was just following protocol. Those boys," he cut in, his tone now colder, "are customers on our airline. Customers who were wrongfully removed from a flight under your watch. And now, I have executives calling me, telling me this is becoming an issue." Melissa's mouth went dry. "An issue?" "A public relations issue," he clarified, his words clipped. "The mother of those boys is furious, and she has every right to be. She called corporate. She told them what happened, and now people are asking questions. Melissa, do you have any idea what you've done?" She felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had thought she was being careful. She had thought she was making the right call. But now, "I was just trying to make sure everything was in order," she said quickly. "I thought there was a problem with their tickets." Her father exhaled, long and slow. "No, you wanted there to be a problem. And now, I'm getting dragged into cleaning up your mess." Melissa felt a lump form in her throat. "I didn't mean." "It doesn't matter what you meant," he cut her off again. "What matters is the perception. Do you have any idea who those boys' uncle is?" She blinked. "Their uncle?" Her father let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't even bother checking, did you? Their uncle is Desmond Carter." Melissa froze. The name hit her like a slap. Desmond Carter, the CEO of Sky Atlantic Airline's biggest investor. A man who held significant power in the company. A man her father had worked hard to keep on their side. "You're joking," she whispered. "Does it sound like I'm joking?" Her father snapped. "Melissa, do you understand the damage you've just done? If Desmond Carter gets involved, if this escalates, we could be facing a lawsuit. Or worse, a media storm that paints this airline in the worst possible light." Melissa's hands began to shake. She had thought this was just another routine situation, just another decision she had the authority to make. But now, she was realizing she had miscalculated, badly. Her father's voice was sharp as ever. "You need to fix this. I don't care what you have to do. I don't care how you do it. But this will not become a bigger problem. Do you understand me?" Melissa nodded quickly, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes, I understand." The line went dead. She stood there for a moment, staring at her phone, her mind racing. This wasn't just about the boys anymore. This was about her own job, her future. If her father was this angry, it meant she was standing on dangerous ground. Her gaze darted back to the boarding area, where Marcus and Jaden were being led onto the plane. The passengers still looked at her differently. The staff seemed to be avoiding her. The weight of what she had done was sinking in, but instead of regret, a new feeling bubbled up inside her. Frustration. Why was she the one being blamed? She had done what she thought was right. She had followed her instincts. Was she really supposed to ignore her gut just because someone had connections? She straightened her shoulders. No. She wouldn't let this ruin her. Melissa turned, heading toward the service counter. If she was going to fix this, she needed to act fast. Meanwhile, on the plane, Marcus and Jaden sat in their seats, still shaken. Jaden kept his arms crossed, his small frame hunched as he stared at the window. "That lady didn't want us here," he muttered. Marcus didn't answer right away. He felt it too. He had seen it in her eyes, the way she had looked at them, not like passengers, not like kids traveling alone, but like a problem she wanted to get rid of. "I know," Marcus finally said. "But we're here now." Jaden sniffed. "What if she tries something else?" Marcus glanced around the cabin. Other passengers were getting settled, the flight attendants moving through the aisles, but something still felt off. Like the air was heavier. Like this wasn't over. "We'll be fine," Marcus said, but he wasn't sure if he believed it. He just had a bad feeling. A feeling that this flight was going to be anything but normal. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants prepared for takeoff. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind racing. Something still didn't feel right. The way Melissa had looked at them before they reboard, the tension in the air, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Jaden sat quietly beside him, gripping the armrest tightly. His little brother always tried to act tough, but Marcus knew him well enough to see through it. The fear was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. "You okay?" Marcus asked, nudging him lightly. Jaden didn't look away from the window. "I just wanna get home." Marcus nodded. He wanted that too. But deep down, he knew this flight wasn't going to be that simple. A few rows ahead, a flight attendant was whispering to another crew member. Their eyes flickered toward Marcus and Jaden before quickly turning away. He could feel it. People were still watching them. Some passengers glanced in their direction before looking away just as fast. It was like they were waiting for something to happen. Marcus clenched his jaw and took a deep breath, trying to push away the unease settling in his chest. The engines roared to life, and within minutes, the plane was lifting off the ground, ascending into the sky. For a brief moment, Marcus tried to convince himself that once they were in the air, everything would settle down. But as soon as they reached cruising altitude, something happened that made his stomach drop. A voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a minor issue with one of our seating arrangements, and we need to make some quick adjustments. We kindly ask passengers Marcus and Jaden Carter to please step to the front of the cabin for reassignment." Marcus's entire body tensed. Jaden turned to him, eyes wide with confusion. What do they mean? Marcus didn't know, but he didn't like it. A different flight attendant, not Melissa but another one who seemed hesitant, approached their row. She offered a tight, forced smile. "Boys, I need you to come with me." Marcus didn't move. "Why?" The woman's smile faltered. "There's been a miscommunication with your seats. We just need to sort it out." Jaden's breathing grew faster. "We're not getting kicked off again, are we?" The flight attendant hesitated for half a second too long. Marcus's jaw tightened. His mom had fought to get them back on this plane. Their tickets were fine. They were already in their seats. So why were they being asked to move again? "No," Marcus said firmly, looking the flight attendant straight in the eye. "We're staying in our seats." The woman's smile disappeared completely. She straightened, pressing her lips together. "I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate, young man." Passengers were watching now, whispering. A few heads turned, eyebrows raised in curiosity, but no one spoke up. Marcus felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't trying to cause trouble, but something wasn't right. He could feel it in his gut. "I want to speak to the captain," he said. "Or a supervisor." The flight attendant's expression flickered, and for the first time, he saw uncertainty in her eyes. I'll be right back." She turned and quickly disappeared toward the front of the cabin. Marcus exhaled, feeling Jaden's grip tighten on his sleeve. "What's happening?" Jaden whispered. "I don't know," Marcus muttered. "But I don't like it." A few minutes passed, the tension thick in the air. The other passengers pretended not to listen, but Marcus could feel their curiosity growing. And then, just as suddenly as before, Melissa reappeared. She wasn't smiling. She walked straight up to their row, her expression stiff and unreadable. "There's been a mistake," she said flatly. "You boys were never supposed to be on this flight." Marcus's stomach twisted. "That's not true," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Our mom booked these tickets. We were cleared to be here." Melissa's eyes flickered, but she didn't back down. "There's nothing I can do. You need to come with me." Jaden let out a small, panicked breath. Marcus didn't move. "You're lying," he said. "You're trying to get us off this plane again." Melissa's jaw tightened. For a split second, something almost like panic flashed in her eyes, but she masked it quickly. "If you don't come with me willingly, I will call security when we land." The words hit like a punch to the stomach. Melissa wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let them reach their destination without making them feel like they didn't belong. But before Marcus could respond, another voice cut through the air. "I'd love to hear why these boys were never supposed to be on this flight." The entire cabin fell silent. A man stood up from his first-class seat, his gaze locked onto Melissa. He was tall, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, his presence commanding attention. Desmond Carter. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. Jaden gripped his arm. "Is that?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Yeah." Melissa's face went pale. She took a small step back, as if suddenly realizing just how bad this situation had become. Desmond slowly walked toward them, his gaze never leaving Melissa's. "I just got off the phone with corporate," he said, his voice calm but deadly. "I was informed that there were no issues with these boys' tickets. Yet here we are mid-flight, and somehow they're still being targeted." Melissa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Desmond raised an eyebrow. "Would you like to explain that to me? Or should I assume you're trying to sabotage this airline on purpose?" Melissa's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Passengers were now openly staring, some murmuring amongst themselves. Marcus's heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything came to light. And from the look in Desmond's eyes, he wasn't going to let this slide. Melissa's face had lost all color. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. The weight of Desmond Carter's stare pinned her in place. The cabin had gone completely silent now. No whispers, no murmurs, just the quiet hum of the engines as every passenger waited to see what would happen next. Marcus could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. He could barely believe what was happening. Just minutes ago, he had felt powerless, certain that Melissa was going to find a way to kick them off the plane again. But now, Desmond Carter himself was standing right in front of them, calling her out in front of everyone. Melissa's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. I was just following protocol," she finally managed to say, her voice unsteady. "I thought there was a seating issue." Desmond tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "That's interesting," he said, his tone almost casual. "Because I just spoke with corporate, and they confirmed that no such issue exists. So tell me, Melissa, what protocol exactly were you following?" Melissa blinked rapidly, her gaze darting around as if looking for backup, but no one came to her defense. The other flight attendants kept their heads down, staying out of it. The passengers continued watching, waiting. Marcus felt Jaden shift beside him, his little brother clutching his sleeve tightly. Jaden's voice was small when he whispered, "Are we in trouble?" Marcus shook his head slowly, but before he could say anything, another voice cut through the tension. "I believe I can explain what's going on." Every head in the cabin turned toward the aisle. A man in a dark gray suit was making his way toward them from the first-class section. He was older, in his late 50s or early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. Melissa visibly stiffened. Desmond's expression darkened slightly. "Harrison," he said, his voice carrying an edge of irritation. Marcus frowned. Who was this man? The man, Harrison, offered a polite smile, but there was something about him that felt off. Too smooth. Too controlled. He turned his attention to Marcus and Jaden, his eyes scanning them in a way that made Marcus's skin crawl. "There's been a misunderstanding," Harrison said calmly. "And I take full responsibility." Melissa's eyes snapped to him in shock. "Wait, what?" Desmond narrowed his eyes. "You take responsibility?" Harrison nodded. "I was the one who advised the crew to double-check these passengers' credentials. It had nothing to do with their background or anything of that nature. It was simply a precautionary measure due to an internal concern. Marcus could feel the shift in the air. The tension wasn't fading, it was changing, twisting into something else. Desmond didn't look convinced. An internal concern? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Harrison nodded again, completely unfazed. Yes. You see, there have been multiple instances of unauthorized access to first-class amenities on recent flights. Given the situation, we instructed the crew to be extra vigilant with certain passenger profiles. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Certain passenger profiles? Desmond's face remained unreadable, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. And yet, the only passengers who were repeatedly questioned, removed, and now targeted mid-flight, happened to be my nephews? Gasps rippled through the cabin. Marcus's breath caught. Nephews? Jaden's head snapped up in shock. Wait, what? Harrison didn't flinch, but his expression remained carefully neutral. I assure you, this was not personal. It was simply a precautionary measure. Melissa looked stunned. It was clear she hadn't known who Marcus and Jaden were either. Desmond exhaled slowly, his gaze burning into Harrison. I want a full report on my desk tonight, he said coldly. And if I find out this was anything more than precautionary, I will personally ensure that everyone involved in this so-called misunderstanding faces consequences. Harrison nodded smoothly, as if he had expected nothing less. Of course. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. Something about this still didn't add up. Why would an executive personally step in to cover for Melissa? Why did it seem like they were trying to quietly sweep this under the rug? And why had no one told them that Desmond Carter was their uncle? Jaden looked up at Desmond, still wide-eyed. Are you really our uncle? Desmond's hard expression softened slightly as he turned to face them. Yes, he said simply. I am. Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. His mom had never talked about Desmond Carter before. If he was their uncle, why had she kept it a secret? Melissa, still standing frozen beside them, looked like she wanted to disappear. Harrison, on the other hand, remained perfectly calm. Now that we've cleared up the confusion, Harrison said smoothly, perhaps we should return to our seats and allow the flight to continue as planned. Desmond didn't move. His gaze lingered on Harrison for a long, tense moment before he finally nodded. We're not done here, he warned. Harrison smiled politely. Of course not. Melissa, realizing she was no longer in control of the situation, quickly excused herself and walked away, her shoulders stiff. Desmond turned back to Marcus and Jaden, his expression softer now. I'll explain everything when we land, he said. For now, just sit tight. No one will bother you again. Marcus wasn't sure how to feel. He had so many questions. About Desmond, about his mother, about whatever this was. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a flight attendant making a bad call. There was something much bigger happening behind the scenes. And Marcus was determined to find out the truth. As the plane continued its flight, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. Even though Desmond had stepped in and shut down whatever was happening, Harrison's calm, collected reaction didn't sit well with him. It was like the man had expected all of this, as if he had planned for it. Jaden sat quietly beside him, still processing the shocking revelation that Desmond Carter was their uncle. Marcus had questions too. Why had their mother never mentioned him? And why was this entire situation starting to feel bigger than just a flight mix-up? Desmond returned to his first-class seat, but Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't done with this, not by a long shot. Marcus wasn't either. He needed answers. After what felt like hours, the seatbelt sign lit up, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent. The tension in the cabin remained thick, but people were starting to relax now that the drama seemed to be over. But Marcus knew better. As the plane landed smoothly and taxied toward the gate, Marcus turned to Jaden. "Stick close to me," he murmured. "I don't think this is over." Jaden swallowed hard and nodded. The moment the plane doors opened, Desmond was already out of his seat. He gave Marcus and Jaden a nod, silently telling them to follow him. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Marcus caught sight of Harrison, speaking into his phone with a low, serious expression. Melissa, looking pale and shaken, trailed behind him, avoiding everyone's gaze. Security officers were waiting at the gate. Not just airport security, corporate security. The kind that didn't mess around. Desmond didn't stop walking. He led Marcus and Jaden through the terminal with purposeful strides, his phone in his hand as he sent a quick message. Within moments, they were outside, where a sleek black car with tinted windows was already waiting. "Get in," Desmond said firmly. Marcus hesitated for a second but then climbed in, Jaden right behind him. The door shut, and the car pulled away from the airport smoothly. For a moment, there was silence. Then Desmond exhaled and turned to face them. "I know you have questions," he said. Marcus didn't waste a second. "Why didn't our mom ever tell us about you?" Desmond's jaw tightened slightly. "Because she didn't want you involved in this." "Involved in what?" Desmond hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I own the airline. But what you don't know is that I've been in a long battle with people inside my own company. People like Harrison." Marcus felt his stomach twist. "What do you mean?" Desmond leaned back, his expression unreadable. "There's been corruption in my company for years. Harrison is at the center of it. I've been working to get rid of him, but he's careful. He's powerful. And he knows how to cover his tracks." Jaden frowned. "But what does that have to do with us?" Desmond's gaze darkened. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Because Harrison didn't just target you randomly. He knew exactly who you were, even if Melissa didn't. He wanted you off that plane for a reason." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "So this wasn't just about discrimination?" Desmond shook his head. "No. It was something bigger. And I need to know why." Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing. What did Harrison want with them? Why had he gone to such lengths to make sure they didn't stay on that flight? The car pulled up to a high-rise building, and Desmond wasted no time leading them inside. They took a private elevator up to a sleek office, where a large screen was already displaying security footage from the airport. Desmond tapped a few buttons, rewinding the footage to earlier that day. "I had my team pull surveillance from the terminal." Marcus and Jaden watched as the screen showed them entering the airport, going through security, and heading to their gate. But then, something strange happened. A man in a dark coat approached the airline counter. He leaned in, speaking to the agent for a few moments before discreetly handing over a small folder. Desmond paused the video. "That man works for Harrison." Marcus's heart pounded. "What was in that folder?" Desmond's face was grim. "I don't know yet. But whatever it was, it led to you two being removed from the flight." Jaden's voice was small. "So, someone planted something about us?" Desmond nodded. "And I intend to find out what." Marcus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just about a flight attendant making a bad call. This was something bigger, something planned. And for some reason they were at the center of it. Desmond turned to them, his expression serious. "I need you both to trust me. Because whatever Harrison is up to, this is just the beginning." Marcus exchanged a look with Jaden, a shiver running down his spine. This wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus sat still, trying to process everything. He had boarded that plane thinking it was just another flight, but now he was in his uncle's office, staring at evidence that suggested something much bigger was at play. His stomach twisted as he glanced at Jaden, who still looked overwhelmed. None of this made sense. Why would someone go to such lengths to target them? And why had their mother never told them about Desmond? Desmond took a deep breath before speaking again. Your mother and we haven't been in contact for years. Not because we didn't care about each other, but because she wanted to protect you. Marcus frowned. Protect us from what? Desmond's gaze darkened. From the power struggles inside my company. From people like Harrison. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. When I took over the airline, I wanted to change things. I wanted it to be fair, to be better. But some people who had been running things behind the scenes for years, didn't like that. Harrison is one of them. He's been trying to push me out for a long time. Jaden swallowed hard. And we got caught in the middle? Desmond nodded. Harrison wanted leverage. He probably thought that by targeting you, he could use you as a weakness against me. He didn't expect me to be on that flight. Marcus felt his hands tighten into fists. The idea that they had been nothing more than pawns in some corporate power game made his blood boil. So what do we do now? Desmond leaned forward, his expression firm. Now we turn the tables. He picked up his phone and made a call. Within minutes, his office door opened, and two men in suits walked in. They carried a laptop and several folders, setting them down on the desk before nodding at Desmond. We have everything, one of them said. The flight records, the internal communications, even the footage from security. Marcus watched as Desmond pulled up an email on the screen. His eyes scanned the message before turning back to them. This is the final piece, he said. Harrison ordered the flight crew to remove you from the plane, but he did it under the pretense that there was a security concern. He knew exactly what he was doing, making it look like a legitimate airline decision while actually carrying out his own agenda. Jaden's hands clenched. So he was trying to make us look suspicious? Desmond nodded. That way, even if I intervened, there would be official documentation backing up his claim. He thought he was covering his tracks. He smiled slightly. But he underestimated how quickly I would act. Marcus leaned forward. What happens to him now? Desmond's smile didn't fade. I've already called an emergency board meeting. With the evidence we have, Harrison won't just be fired. He'll be facing legal consequences. Manipulating security protocols for personal gain is a serious offense. For the first time since the flight, Marcus felt a sense of relief. It wasn't just about them anymore. Harrison had likely done this to other people, abused his power in ways they didn't even know. But now, he was going to face the consequences. Jaden exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just a bit. So, it's over? Desmond looked at them, his gaze softening. Almost. Marcus narrowed his eyes. What else? Desmond hesitated for a moment before speaking. Your mother kept me away to protect you, but I don't want to stay away anymore. I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. It was a lot to take in. He had spent his whole life thinking they didn't have any other family besides their mom. And now, here was Desmond Carter, the owner of one of the biggest airlines in the country, sitting in front of them, offering to be in their lives. Jaden was the first to speak. I think that would be okay. Desmond's expression softened. Good. Because family is important. And I've spent too much time letting business come before that. Marcus nodded slowly. He wasn't sure how this would all play out, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of their story. If anything, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next day, news broke that Harrison had been removed from his position. Reports circulated about his unethical actions, and Desmond made a public statement about ensuring fairness and integrity within the company. The airline issued an official apology to Marcus and Jaden, and Melissa, the flight attendant, was quietly let go. Marcus knew that no apology could undo what had happened, but at least justice had been served. More importantly, He and Jaden had gained something they never expected, a connection to family they never knew they had. As they prepared to head home, Desmond walked them to the car waiting to take them to the airport. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly. "I'll be visiting soon. And maybe next time, I'll introduce you to the rest of the family." Jaden grinned. "You mean there's more of us?" Desmond chuckled. "Oh, plenty." Marcus smirked. "Guess we've got a lot to catch up on." Desmond smiled warmly. "That we do." As the car pulled away, Marcus leaned back in his seat, feeling lighter than he had in days. The journey had been unexpected, and at times, overwhelming. But in the end, it had led to something good. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like they weren't alone.